All right, so and let me get everything situated here. So, okay. Well, welcome everyone to Connecting Students, Connecting Communities, the Nilgiris Field Learning Program, our first webinar of our series. So I'll kind of just start off introducing AIIS and giving you a little bit of background. This webinar, just so everyone knows, will be posted on our anniversary website, and we'll be posting about it on social media in case you have to drop out, or if you know anybody who missed it, then you can share the link to our wonderful presentations and discussions. And we will probably post the audio also as kind of a podcast episode in case you are subscribed to the AIIS podcasts or you aren't and now would like to. So we'll be posting it in a couple of different places for you to review or share with your colleagues. The American Institute of Indian Studies was founded 60 years ago to further the knowledge of India in the United States by supporting American scholarship on India. The programs of AIIS foster the production of and engagement with scholarship on India and promote and advance mutual understanding between the citizens of the United States and of India. AIIS seeks to provide access to scholarship about India to a wide and diverse audience. So again, welcome everyone to the August 2022 episode, or what is it, September, October, I wrote this a while ago. Episode of the American Institute of Indian Studies special 60th anniversary webinar series. My name is Anita Silvakanapal, and I'm the Strategic Initiatives and Project Specialist for AIIS, and perpetually time and space confused right now. This year, we've been celebrating a history of scholarship in and through AIIS, exploring the narratives within the walls of the Institute and conversations that have happened thanks to the support of AIIS. Today, we turn from history to current research that highlights collaboration and co-creation, a foundational piece of what makes AIIS the American Institute of Indian Studies. This is the first of two webinars on AIIS and collaboration, and the next webinar, entitled Sharing Homes, U.S.-India Collaborative Scholarship, will be on November 4th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can find information on both of the webinars at aiis60.org/events. So now I'm thrilled just to turn things over to the president of AIIS, Sumati Ramaswamy.
Thank you, Anandi. Let me begin by adding my words of welcome to everyone who's here. In particular, my sincere thanks on behalf of the Institute to our four panelists for joining us to discuss their exciting collaborative work. I also want to thank the AIIS staff who put a lot of effort in setting up this particular program. Elise Auerbach, our director in Chicago, and Purnima Mehta, our director general in New Delhi. Anandi, of course, who you've already met, who's our wonderful strategic initiatives and project specialist, and the very special Richa Vipuluri, who's a graduate student at University of Virginia, who's interning with us this semester, and really grateful to have her on our team. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to briefly introduce the panelists who are going to be presenting their work. I'll begin.
Jeez.
I know. Do we have our first freeze? Oh,
am I back?
Yes, you're back. Welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll begin with Neema's introduction. Apologies, Neema. So Neema Kudva is a professor of city and regional planning at the College of Architecture, Art and Planning at Cornell University, where she also serves as Senior Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, as Fellow of the Atkinson Center for a Sustainable Future, and as member of the Faculty Advisory Board of the South Asia Program. Dr. Kudva is also the faculty lead for the Nilgiris Field Learning Center. Andrew Wilford is a professor of anthropology at Cornell. Dr. Wilford's work explores aspects of selfhood, identity, and subjectivity within a matrix of power and statecraft, with some of his latest work in the Nilgiris highlighting mental health and psychiatry. Pratim Roy is the founder director of the Keystone Foundation, about which we're going to hear more about today, based in the Nilgiris and doing a lot of exciting work in the area of environmental justice. He was also a Hubert Humphrey Fellow at Cornell University and an ecologist by training. At Cornell, he was instrumental in floating the idea of the Nilgiris Field Learning Center, a reality. Last but not least, Anita Varghese is the Director of Biodiversity at the Keystone Foundation. She helped establish the Nilgiri Natural History Society and the Western Ghats Plant Specialist Group of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. She's been a part of the NFLC since its inception and is one of the course directors. So with that, I turn it over back to Anandi to take us through the next phase.
All right, thank you, Sumati, for those introductions for everyone. So just want to welcome everyone, Neema, Andrew, Pratim, and Anita. Thank you so much for joining us. So jumping right in, I'd love for us to give you, to give us some context about the program. So can you tell us a little bit about the Nilgiris Field Learning Program and how it intersects with AIIS?
Pratim, Anita, before I do this, should I show some slides first and just have everybody kind of see where we work and you know, maybe just get a visual and factual kind of mooring. So you can see the slides, right?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, great. So here, let me just make sure I'm running this. For all of you who are here, thank you and welcome. And thank you so much, Sumati, Anandi, and everyone in AIIS, Richa, for making this happen. We're really, truly appreciative of all the help that AIIS has given us. Andrew and I have both held research fellowships while we were working in the NFLC, and it was a very crucial source of support for us and continues to be. So thank you for that, Punima and her team in Delhi, which was so amazing. Coming back to the Nilgiris, you know, we have a website, so please do, explore that. It's got a little bit stuck during the pandemic, but all our work, a lot of our work and our students' work sort of sits on that website. And you know, when we talk about our work that we did together, and it started with Pratim coming here as a Humphrey Fellow and, like, you know, drumming his way through faculty offices with this idea and this dream that he had, we really kind of, we've been writing about our work together, and we think of it as being structured around 7 binaries, really across the question of disciplines, right? So transdisciplinarity, where education is as much about research and practice and changing things on the ground. We look at knowledge as being both rooted in scientific rationality and in traditional ecological systems. We consider this binary, or the division between the rural and the urban, as something that is problematic, and we work against it. Andrew will talk much more about the ways in which we think about the health of the body, the health of the mind, the health of the community, and how all of that sort of comes together. We think about diversity in both socio-ecological and biodiversity terms. And I think most importantly, we're aiming for long-term change through the work of education. So both short-term sort of responses to community expressed needs and long-term change in the ways in which we create, as Pratim and Anita always say, perceptive leaders. I don't need to tell this group where the NFLC is, where the Nilgiris is, but maybe some of you would like to know. It's the red dot on the map there in the Nilgiris district, which is part of the Nilgiris biosphere, which is a much larger region and stretches across 3 Indian states. We work primarily with wherever Keystone works, so mostly in you know, parts of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And so who are the learners and the teachers in the Nilgiris, right? This community and students that the title refers to. The learners are all of us, faculty, a group of faculty from Cornell who started this program and keep it running. Andrew and I represent that group. The staff at Keystone, who are so integrally sort of involved in this, and then our students, Cornell students from any undergraduate major that allows them to go abroad. At Cornell, we have about 14,000, right? And young people from the Adivasi communities that Keystone works with. So this is the core NFLC community. We work together, so collaboration and co-creation are very rooted in the work that we do. And so these sort of images of the classroom are quite common. And you see Anita there with the group that's just come back from a field trip. This is our first group that went out. And more recently, last year, a tiny little group mapping the campus. The curriculum is bilingual, and we use sequential translation. It's in Tamil and English. And we run 2 programs currently. Andrew runs a summer program, and we have a spring semester program that I think is in the process of winding down a little bit because of the ways in which our curriculum is changing here at Cornell. Both programs, there's a first half where we really focus in on context, place, various topics, issues, language and culture and learning research methods. And the Keystone campus, which is just beautiful, you should visit, is the base for that first half of the program. And the second half, you go out and do field-based engaged research along with, so the students work in pairs along with translators. And so the NFLC classroom then is not just the Keystone campus, and there's Pratim with his beret in this beautiful space, meeting space that they have. And here's another site, photograph of the campus here, but it's also all of the biosphere, right? We go out a lot. And so it's the town, it's Keystone's production and field sites, it's hamlets where the communities we work with live, and it's the entire biosphere. And we have something called the NFLC bus that Anita runs, which takes people across and over, and it's quite wonderful. If you can see the teeny tiny little images on your screens, please squint at them because they're quite wonderful. You'll see that this is the hostel, which Keystone has sort of built for all the students who come in. This is the view that we have from the hostel. Tea time in Keystone is sacrosanct. And so that becomes a really important part of the rhythm of the day. And we work together. Co-creation, like I said, and collaboration are so central. There are narratives that Keystone has painted of the place, of the of ecological understandings, and students study those. And always there are these field trips that we do. And you can see there are production landscapes, there are landscapes of like wild nature, there are agricultural landscapes, there are small town landscapes. And so we go across all of this. And then in the second half of the semester, of course, the students are in the field doing participatory engaged learning. And we always end every semester, every program with community presentations. I'm going to just walk you very quickly through 2 interventions, but I've just chosen Andrew's and mine, which I partner with people, we both partner. Even the faculty are twinned and partnered. So we work with people. So I work with Anita and Pratim a lot now. Andrew works with Jyoti and Anita and so on and so forth. And so here's the community wellness intervention. It started off as a health survey, trying to sort of understand how traditional systems work and how food sort of works also as medicine and so on and so forth. And over the years, it has also sort of morphed into the training of community health workers, connecting Keystone to Banyan, which is another very well-known NGO that does mental health work based in Chennai, but has now come into the Nilgiris and so on. Andrew will talk more about this in some detail. The project that I've been working with is the water and waste project. It's like the urbanization end of our story. And we've been building out this project year by year to really begin to understand how our focus on waste married together with Keystone's initial focus on water. They moved into waste too now. Really, we've cataloged it, we've understood it, and now, of course, are trying to make interventions in the place. Last year, the group that was working in Kotagiri brought together these 2 streams, wellness and waste, around this question of wildlife and conflict in peri-urban Kotagiri. And so this is the group of students who was out there. And here's a map of Kotagiri. So that's the yellow line, right? And that green piece over there is a shola forest, longwood shola, that comes into Kotagiri. And Anita's been really trying to work through this project of trying to understand human wildlife conflict. And it's a very core part part of what's going on in the region. And so we worked in 4 field sites, and this is what the field sites or the villages, the hamlets really look like. And what the students were doing was following a number of research methods to better begin to understand what the problem is, what the issues are in the region. And so they did transect walks to really understand, invasive species, different kind of landscapes, birds, animals. They looked at all kinds of basic services. They cataloged things. They interviewed people. And as always, they presented to the community at the very end. And so you see, these community presentations are really quite fascinating because they involve people coming back together, and sometimes there can be quite a lot of sort of conflict, and the students are taken aback when they get challenged. But I think it's quite wonderful because it becomes an opportunity for everybody to understand the work, celebrate the work, respond to the work. So it is part of this process of collaboration and co-creation. And there's always a celebration at the end of it. There's like I have wonderful photographs. It's like almost like a mela, right? And then you get little certificates and all of that kind of thing, which is important. It's really important to our community students as well as our Cornell students. I have a little video. We don't need to share it. It was made by the first group that went out there. And if we have time, oops. Oh, no, I didn't mean to do that. We've been cataloging our achievements and assessing ourselves quite heavily. We can talk more about how we do that every year, and I can walk you through some of that if you're interested. But very briefly, right, we're talking about community and students, which are both so core to this program. And I wanted to just show you some pairs of students and the kinds of things that have happened. And so here's Wyatt and Montesh, the 2 young men in the middle with Montesh's family. Montesh is Toda, and he continues, and they did a project on wild edibles, and he continues to actually work in collaboration with Keystone on thinking through that project and taking it forwards. Here are Cole and Pandi, 2 people from the first group. Cole is now working in the New York City mayor's office. Pandi was doing tutoring, and he helps run his family's small sort of farm. And Cole, during the pandemic, was really kind of disturbed by what he was hearing from India and organized the entire Cornell undergraduate community to collect money to send back to Keystone, who by then had started to do a lot of relief and food distribution work in the community. There's Jayanti, she's sitting over here, also a member of one of our first groups, who runs Radio Kotagiri, which is a very important mechanism, an AM radio mechanism by which we get information, Keystone gets information out into the community. And Radio Kotagiri was quite important, I think, as we heard in recordings that we made, quite important in getting information out during the pandemic when India went into a very hasty and very difficult lockdown. Pratim and Anita will talk more, I think, about what happened during the pandemic, but they were very involved. Keystone was very involved in relief and distribution efforts, in the making of masks and reaching people. And we were sort of, Cole through the money effort. Our community students who now work with Keystone were all involved in this. And so here are other students, the one in the middle, I'm blanking on the name, Pratim, Anita, help. I'm blanking on everybody's names right now. Even yours. Anyway, so here's, so they were so involved in thinking through bringing back certain patterns of cultivation, in distribution of food, in taking health information across and just reaching out to communities. The Adivasi communities of the Nilgiris have a 97% vaccination rate right now, largely because of Keystone's efforts. And the food question was huge. Food insecurity is massive and became very bad during the pandemic. And so Keystone was quite involved in sourcing food, packaging it, and reaching out to communities, and our students were part of that effort. And so I just want to say thank you. Tried to do this very fast, and I know Anandi and Richa have a bunch of questions organized for us. So I'll turn it back over to you, Anandi, Richa. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Neema. And these questions are all just kind of for everyone. And so, jump in as it's not directed to anyone in particular. I'm kind of curious. So thank you for laying out the brilliant work that these students have been able to do in the different forms that it's taken. I have so many questions, but to stick to some of the foundational questions so we can understand a little bit more about the program. Why choose the focus of pairing students with the Indigenous community members and not, and you mentioned that faculty do pair with other kind of faculty there, but why focus on the student portion of the program as opposed to a faculty focused program or, you know, a graduate student researcher focused program?
Who wants to go? I'm always ready to jump in. You don't want me to be talking all the time. Pratim. Andrew.
You go ahead. You go ahead, Neema.
Why? You're fearless leader. Okay. Andrew, Anandi, I think part of it is what Pratim and, what all our Keystone colleagues always talk about, which is this business of our time span, right? We're really interested in the long legacy. I think Keystone's always interested in the long legacy. And so part of this in terms of creating an educational program is when we first started this, when Pratim first came here, his question always was to us was, can you teach differently? Right? And so that was where we started. Can we teach differently? We knew we had to cross those 7 binaries or more, right? I mean, those are the 7 that we've landed on in a way, but we knew we had to cross those. I have a long-standing interest in both pedagogical structures and in Indigenous community. I worked in sort of the southern part of Karnataka for my dissertation, looking at Indigenous communities there. And so I had that long-standing interest. Keystone started its work with the honey hunters, right, of the Nilgiris. And so their core work has always been with Indigenous communities. So I think it's a combination of the strengths that Keystone brought, the strengths that Andrew, myself, and our other colleagues brought. It's centered around sustainability, right? It's really centered around sustainability. And then that's how we brought it. So we do have faculty exchanges. I mean, all of us. They've come to Cornell, we go there, we have faculty exchanges, other Keystone staff have come here for, trainings is a weird word, but to work together. We have doctoral students who go. I have one right now who works in the Nilgiris. We have master's students who've gone on short-term internships. So we do have other people, but our organized programming is very much to do with undergraduates. And I think the other piece of why we've stuck with just this pair, Cornell students and Indigenous communities, is Keystone has a tribal council that we have to get permission from to work in, right? To work in the region. And they were very clear that they wanted only their kids and others, that their kids had to be centered, because otherwise the community gets marginalized all the time. And so it's our commitment to the community and to the place to center the young people from the communities Keystone works with. Andrew, Pratim, I don't know if you want to add something.
I guess just very briefly, I mean, one of the things that I've learned being a part of this program and working with Anita, Pratim, and several other colleagues there is that we need to disabuse ourselves and our students of some of our disciplinary knowledge. And Neema's already hinted at these binaries. And this has been a very eye-opening experience this last decade for me, working collaboratively and learning how these communities possess tremendous local knowledge and are good environmental stewards. And for example, with climate change, which may be another area we touch on, the sort of climate resilient horticultural knowledge that these communities possess is incredibly valuable. But we of course also have to disabuse our students that they're coming in as experts. They're coming in to learn from their age peers about things. And of course, training future leaders in the community, as Neema just pointed to, is very central to this. So I think, from our perspective, it's very important that an international immersion experience for our students isn't one where they go in with a silo mentality and sort of carry all that baggage with them, but are truly immersed and are transformed. And so the pedagogy that Neema and I worked on, Neema in particular worked quite hard on in the beginning, was exercises that leveled the playing field. So learning exercises in which neither group would have a distinct advantage. And if any group had an advantage in these learning exercises, it might be the community that's closer to home, the Indigenous community member students. Pratim, Anita.
called, the students dubbed them very early on as crossing boundary exercises. So for all of us now, we use the shorthand CBE, but it's quite a critical part of the, I don't know, technologies of learning, if you want to call it that, Anandi.
This is fabulous. So there are so many words here that I was noticing. Neema, in one of your slides, you had kind of these Venn diagrams, overlapping forms of knowledge. There was the traditional ecological knowledge, and of course we're using terms sustainability and health, and of course climate change and all of these words. And then just what Andrew was saying, the change in disciplinary knowledge that you're hoping to kind of elicit in the students going over, and all of that kind of it just brings me to the kind of a follow-up question about where the students are meeting the other students, in this moment of literal translation of language, but also of concepts, of ways of thinking, of ways of observing, just the vocabulary, even just what the point of views that we're using at these intersections. So is there an observable kind of moment of translation at the intersection of the different student understandings of global phenomenon like climate change and health, coming from a US standpoint, and then that from the Indigenous communities? But also, as I'm phrasing that, I'm saying terms as if they're separate, and health is somehow separate from sustainability and development or something like that. And even, Neema, as you were introducing some of the projects, it was obvious that there was not a separation, and that we kind of use terms from our disciplinary backgrounds as separate silos. So I'm wondering kind of what you've observed around these kind of moments of translation and disruption of conceptual knowledge.
Pratim, you and Anita should go.
Yeah. Anita, you want to go first? You're muted. You're muted.
Very, very
Okay.
deliberately, Pratim. She's kept herself muted.
Yeah. I think, Anandi, that's really the central part of NFLC when they meet here. And what happens is Cornell does an orientation before they land up here. They do a Tamil course, and they go through an orientation, a rigorous orientation by Neema, Andrew, and the others of what to expect and what kind of a cultural shock or experience that they have to experience. And we also, at this end, when we select the cohort of Adivasi leaders, we go through a little bit of an English class with them, and generally a little bit of an orientation. But we also don't want to prep them too much, because we just want to see how the whole interaction happens. So it's a bit like Petri dish, it's a large Petri dish where you just see how these two things completely merge and marinate. And that's the beauty of this course, because one thing is happening in the classroom, and one thing that's where they live together in the campus. And that happens, and the kind of learning that happens there, their cultures, their food habits, their relationships, their views of the world. And that's like an unstoppable thing. And by the time the next day happens, you almost see that there's a step has been taken again, and it's a thing which you have just unraveled. You've just facilitated this whole thing between both these groups of people. And by the end of 15 weeks, or by the end of 6 to 8 weeks, whichever the course is, you see something new happening out there, and going to the field. And you see, the 30-year work that we have been doing here, we realize that our major client, or the major people whom we work with, are Indigenous people. Our knowledge stems from them. Our learning and de-learning stems from them. So we want to kind of create this experience to these students. And that happens very, very serendipitously, very interesting way. It just happens. That transition takes place very creatively sometimes. So you can plan a lot of things, but when you see these two groups meet and interact in a classroom, something else happens. Anita, please.
Yeah. So, taking forward from what Pratim said, also that a lot of things for us that we didn't expect happen also. For instance, you know, when students come in from Cornell and you have a notion of what an Adivasi student knows about and how an Adivasi student wants to portray their life. And, you know, the time I think we do these role plays to tell each other about each other's lives. And believe it or not, like every, now it's 8 batches. And the one thing that really at the end of those role plays that comes out is how there's such a sense of community in one set of students and how it's a very nuclear, individual driven kind of family. So, I mean, and it's just an understanding, and the bridges are built like that. It's not to start by saying yours is better or mine is better. It's this whole bridges that get, you know, these connections that start from themselves also. And, you know, the one time we talked about, I think it was, one of the students in the first batch talking about his, when he drives through the forest, what does he do when he sees an elephant? And he actually enacted a scene where he gets off, takes out a cell phone and takes a photo of the elephant. Right? And, you know, all of us were expecting like he would use elephant whispering words to calm the elephant down. But no, he wasn't doing that. He was going to take out his cell phone and shoot a good picture of the elephant. So
and then run away. Remember, Anita? He then turned and ran away, and which was also very instructive. And all the Cornell lot was all like, "What is he doing?"
Where's all this magic of traditional knowledge with which you're supposed to calm the elephant or something like that? Anyway, so I think those bridges, there's not a lot of planning, but then there is a lot of you need to, what we have these debriefs at the end of the day, at the end of the week. There's a lot of unpacking, there's a lot of disentangling, there's a lot of discussion that needs to be part of the daily routine. And I think that helps people on both sides, on 3 sides, even with us running the program, for us to understand. These are sessions that help build that interdisciplinarity. I mean, it's very easy to talk about interdisciplinarity. We all want to do it, and we all think we can do it. But running this program, we've understood what it takes. And I think that's something that I just wanted to chip in. And, you know, when we were talking about, ideas of climate change, traditional knowledge, and what about gender? Like when we throw gender into the classroom, oh my God, it's like, you know, how we see it from the sort of organized discipline of university and academia, and how communities who live it see it. So it was a very fascinating conversation. I find the ones on gender most challenging, and I learn a lot in those sessions.
So you know, Anandi, you'd asked, I mean, I think there's a lot of deschooling that we have to do. And Anita talked about these debriefs, right? And again, going back to like our pedagogical methods, which we've evolved, you know, together by learning how to do it, right? And so the days have very clear rhythms. The week has a rhythm, the semester or 8-week program. So we're very, very, there are certain routines that we really hold to, and we've designed certain pieces. So these crossing boundary exercises, they sound kind of silly when they're talked about like that, but they're central to breaking down the boundaries, actually, because we do language learning, vocabulary, thematic learning, it's contextualized, and it brings in lived experience. So they are 1-hour exercises that are scripted almost by the line. And, you know, and AIIS actually was supposed to be we were supposed to work with the Tamil teachers from AIIS to put together these textbooks for our program and others who want to do programs like ours. And then, of course, the pandemic came, and so that sort of upended everything. But we're back. That grant is still there with us. We just renewed it, so we're going to go back to working on it. And so those exercises are quite central. We do that 3 times a week in the first half of the semester. And then what Anita was talking about, these debriefs, they can be explosive. You never know what to expect. But there's the kind of learning that happens there. And I think for all of us, that's the important piece, right? We always talk about every person at the NFLC is a learner. And so what Andrew was talking about. So those distinctions, sure, we might be leading the conversation and facilitating the conversation, but we learn as much. And it's, we bring it back into our classrooms here. I know Pratim and Anita have, it's infiltrated the work they do over there. And so that those debriefs become also quite central. And we run them very often in the first couple of weeks, and then it starts to slow down. And by the time we reach the research phase, we're doing them once a week. No, Anita?
Yeah.
About. And we do them with everybody. And then we also have debriefs where we separate out the Cornell and the Adivasi kids because their challenges are very different. So we both like subgroups and the whole group.
One thing that I noted in what Anita said was that fantastic example of the elephant whispering expectations, I would say, of the Cornell students coming in and kind of expecting this way that knowledge is formed and framed and enacted and performed and all of this. And myself, as being trained as an ethnographer, using media and talking about co-creation and collaborative ways of doing media-based ethnography, there's all these kind of assumptions that you bring in and you bring to the table about what even is media and how are we even defining this. And so kind of thinking about like methods here a little bit. And Andrew, this question is for you primarily based on your program. So you led the six-week summer program this year, focusing on the pandemic and using this ethnographic framework for the students. So I'm kind of curious, what did ethnography look like in the collaborative framework? Like how, mentioning this like de-learning and learning and all these debriefs around this, and some kind of wondering how this methodology umbrella of ethnography came into this, what conclusions did the students reach, both sets of students, at the end of this around these concepts that are, overlapping, but somehow separate of health and well-being and community?
Yeah, it's a big question. I just wanted to add one little thing to the previous comments, which is at the end of this, any session, whether it's the summer or the spring, there are a lot of tears shed, and they're happy tears of how close the cohorts have become. So I want to underscore, despite all the struggles and issues that we work through, there is real friendship and bonding that continues, and the students from Cornell continue to be in touch with the Keystone students and Keystone alumni. And of course, we've produced publications in which Keystone students have also done that. And as far as the border whatever we want to call them, the border crossing
border.
Crossing border. They never wanted to do it in the beginning, and we're like pulling their hair to get them to actually do it, but they don't want to stop once they start doing it. It's like we say, no, time's up. You need to share now with everyone, because they've broken up into smaller groups when they do it. Everyone is reluctant to engage in that kind of exercise, but once they start, they don't want to stop. So there really is kind of an immersive, almost like camp-like atmosphere that begins early morning and ends late at night with our cohorts in either program. It's the hardest units they've ever earned, but the most fulfilling, I think. As far as ethnography, that's always been central for the 10 years that I've worked with Keystone. My charge was always, from the very beginning, to look at challenges impacting well-being within communities, around a host of issues. But with the summer program that focuses more specifically on health, we used ethnography to look at three main areas. We looked at health systems in the area by interviewing and holding focus group discussions with doctors, nurses, primary health center workers, and ASHA workers. And we really looked then in one project. Second project was to look at challenges faced by the community health workers that Keystone itself has trained. And I'm happy to say we have over 20 now. So that community health program, which began about a decade ago, has really become robust and plays a very important role within the community. And the community health workers themselves were instructed in a way to be the frontline ethnographers of their own communities. So ethnography became part of their own methodology in a way, and we continue to work on scaling up those types of skills and learning from what they observe. But in terms of our student projects this summer, we did shadow the community health workers, the group that worked with them, and interviewed the community health workers, and we had a focus group discussion with all the community health workers. And then the third piece was looking at traditional healing and traditional medicine, specifically within the Irula and Kurumba communities, which are the two communities that we worked most closely with in the well-being program or wellness programs. And that's also been a long interest in this program, to do a kind of knowledge sharing with traditional healers. And this involves both ritual knowledge, but also Pache Marinde, or the green medicine of the forest, that they increasingly have trouble accessing, but is very, very critical to their feelings of well-being. And so these three pieces kind of captured a lot of the local health practices more generally in the area. And specifically this summer, looking at these three perspectives: the health workers, the healers, and the health systems in the area, the biomedical health systems, we wanted to understand that this sort of impact of the pandemic at these three levels, and how all three components were attempting to meet that challenge of the pandemic. And so there were, as mentioned, significant challenges that the lockdowns caused, and that the NGO, in particular Keystone, played a key role in disseminating information, PPE, food and medicine, as Neema had pointed out in her slides. But we also found, and this is where ethnography proved very useful, that where there is resilience, where there is a capacity to aspire and hope, it's grounded in cultural and spiritual traditions that you can't access in any other way. And the healers play a very important role, and continue to play a very important role in that, even though they are few in number and dwindling, and this is a big concern. So part of what we've wanted to do is also capture as much as we can. Much of it's inalienable knowledge and can't be written down, but some of it can be written down. And the healers have sort of changed over the years, recognizing their own vulnerability and dwindling numbers. They've also learned to adapt and work with Keystone and us to document some of at least the green medicines that they've practiced, but also we've tried in ways to revitalize the practice by giving some small grants to the training of traditional healers. It's very hard to recruit new traditional healers given the new kind of demand for wages. So the challenges are very serious, and the loss of traditional medicine and healing practices we found in terms of what we discovered this summer is potentially leaving local communities without a really important source of orientation and meaning in the midst of really dramatic socioeconomic and ecological changes. Dietary changes in particular, linked to changing cultivation patterns or the lack thereof, is really critical. And with cultivation being lost in many contexts, there were important rituals that bound the community together, and offerings to the ancestors that came through these rituals that were directly tied to cultivation within sacred groves and lands around community properties. So there is a kind of domino effect. And when one is impacted, it leaves people vulnerable to, for example, malevolent forces, which we increasingly have documented. These are spiritually malevolent beings or sorcery. So in particular, people have spoken a lot in the research about the paralysis caused by the Odi, which is a kind of supernatural entity of the forest that has turned malevolent. And we maybe could talk about it another time. But more generally, sorcery accusations seem to be rife. And the sorcery accusations in the community that are alarming speak to a broken reciprocity between individuals in the community, relationships with the ancestors that are so paramount to Indigenous worldview, with animals, as has been mentioned, and the forest. I mean, there really were views that things were much more symbiotic, and that there was these reciprocities in a substance, kind of a substantist worldview, were all interlinked. And there is that sort of domino effect where these things are sort of collapsing in some way. And so loss of cultivation has led to cultural and ritual loss, which in turn is producing a kind of existential anxiety, which in turn produces health consequences, particularly mental health, but these then present as as physiological distress, weakness, paralysis, and so on. So, there's a lot of affliction there. So I could go on more and more, but that's part of it. And if there's time later, we can talk about the sort of infrastructure that's lacking in the biomedical domain, and where the gap. What we've seen is a kind of gap. There's a sort of an absence of biomedical care in a very robust way present in the community on the one hand that needs to be scaled up. And on the other hand, there is this sort of threat to traditional medicine, which is the primary care for many, many people. So there's a kind of gap that's open between an absence of the one and a declining of the other. And so trying to suture that gap in particular through the community well-being program is to train community health workers from the community to give them some biomedical training, but then to also offer them as the bridge so that communities that do need biomedical care can access it, know where to go, but also can understand the biomedical treatment that they're receiving, which they largely find alienating and not particularly conducive to their own well-being. So we have collected numerous stories of people going to hospitals and running away because they find it so alienating, stigmatizing, and so on and so forth. That's in brief, but we can come back in Q&A to some of these questions.
I mean, just to add to it, I mean, the ethnography as a method doesn't remain just with the groups Andrew's working with, right? I think that's the important part to really begin to understand that week where where the students are really engaging questions of Indigenous worldviews. They're doing these crossing boundary exercises. They're thinking through questions. They're thinking through ethnography as a method. And those of us who instruct or facilitate the learning, when we design our week of work together, right, in partnership. So Anita and I are doing something together. We do a very kind of, we pick up the breadcrumbs that somebody has dropped before us, right, the week before us, and we drop breadcrumbs for the people coming the week after us. So ethnography as a method starts to run through, right, other ways, other topical questions that we're looking at, or so it's not just thematic questions. So water is running through all of this, landscapes are running through all of this, the people, of course, everything is embodied, but also the method starts to then work across. And I think that's actually a really important part of how we work also, right? So when we're doing community health, there's all this ethnographic work that Andrew's talking about. There's also a community survey. There's also really thinking through what that community health center looks like and what does it mean as a basic service. So it's how Keystone works in a way that we're trying to mimic. And I think Keystone is also shifting. And so it's interesting, actually. A lot of learning.
Yeah, there's so much about the outcomes and of this ethnography. And I love the way thinking about that as ethnography, like the method is like water kind of flowing through and affecting other pieces. I could do much more with that. I think we had time, but thinking about obvious outcomes and consequences of the work there, the program in India. And then the students come back, though, the Cornell students, they come back, and then the students there, they go back, after the program, thinking what happens with the student knowledge after the program, and thinking, Andrew mentioned something of training of students from the Indigenous community and what that kind of can lead them to. But I'm curious, the Cornell students, if what happens with this study abroad experience and knowledge. Do you find that impacts their career paths, or is this a study abroad moment, and then they go back to their regularly scheduled world of physics or whatever it is? And then, for those other interlocutors and colleagues who come to work with you in the program, does your work here, have outcomes, research-wise and networking-wise that applicable to other communities of the global South even?
Do you want to start, Andrew?
Well, I'll try to be briefer, but I would like to hear more from my colleagues at Keystone on this front too. But yes, our Cornell students have gone on and published much of their work. Most of our students are not from physics, they're from the social sciences or pre-med, and they're very interested in sort of public health or environmental governance types of issues as well, or city and regional planning. Anthropology, and so many have done honors theses and articles and have gone on and are now in graduate school. Neema mentioned some who have continued to stay in touch and work like raising funds and being part of the recruitment effort for the next cohort. But yes, absolutely. I think the students have described it to us as a life-changing experience and has shaped their views moving forward. In terms of the kind of collaborations that happen on the Indian side as well, I think for example, this summer, we brought students from Keystone, Indigenous community students, to Chennai, where they worked with the Banyan, which was mentioned earlier, another NGO that focuses on health and well-being. And they were exposed to other Indigenous communities in the Chennai region, and they were very excited about knowledge sharing experiences with other communities and had not been able to have these kinds of encounters before. So I think, the kind of lateral movement and connections between Keystone and other organizations within India is equally critical in terms of, building a kind of network of knowledge sharing at the grassroots level, and of course at the organizational level as well. So I think these consortiums are sort of organic, and Pratim and Anita have built a vast network in India of colleagues, and so this is really something I've learned through interacting with them that's changed my thinking about how knowledge should be disseminated and democratized.
I mean, I could just add a little bit to that, Anandi. So I mean, there's also Sneh and Matthew who are not here on the call, who are Pratim's co-founders, who are also very central to, I think, the way this network sort of starts to get expressed. But there's another. I mean, we can, like I said, we've been documenting very carefully and assessing, which we keep folding back into what we do with the program. But there's other things that have happened. So for example, Pratim and I, together with colleagues of ours in Malawi and Tanzania. So there's Rachel Besner-Kerr, who's an agroecologist here at Cornell, and Stacey Langwick, a medical anthropologist, colleague of Andrew's, also at Cornell. They have been having these 30-year-long collaborations, one in Malawi, one in Tanzania, and then ours, right? And so Pratim and a group of people from, Anita was also there, a group of people from Keystone, we met their collaborators and them, and we came together in Mysore in India for one meeting. And then in Italy, actually, we went to the Slow Food festival and presented there. And so different, and then they came to Cornell, and we've spent like 10 days together here. And so there are different, and we call it the ecological learning collaboratory, right? And so those kinds of collaborations are also a part of what we've been doing, where we bring together different groups from the South. And so that was really the Indian Ocean group, right? East Africa and India. And I know that the groups in Malawi and Tanzania that Rachel and Stacey work with, again, the pandemic interrupted that conversation, are really keen to learn from Keystone. So the connections don't always just work in how we think it's going to work, right? They are most interested in Keystone, not in any of us here at Cornell, which is the way it should be. And so it's a different set of, because, there's so much more learning that's happening on the ground. So I think there are multiple kinds of pathways that open up. Some we design deliberately and facilitate and structure by the very kinds of exercises and technologies we've been describing, right? The rhythms we establish and so on. And some open up, like this Tanzania, Malawi, India connection that we jump-started it in some ways, but it's taken a completely different form.
Yeah, that's fantastic to think about, just all of the kind of organic ways that what you're doing is kind of it takes its own life after the actual program. So you've set up some structures, and then there's so many points that are coming together here. This group, 2 different groups of students, and then their own disciplinary trainings that are coming into this, but also what those disciplines are gaining out of this. And it's fantastic to know that the students are actually creating changes within their own communities from that, whether it's publishing papers on the Cornell side or kind of being a next generation of healers with this kind of a new form of knowledge. And there was one, there's at some point, and I forgot who mentioned it, but it was, all of these things coming together, unlearning, learning, changes and disrupting knowledge. And then at the end of that, there's this something new that's coming out of it. It's not we're just redoing a discipline or something like that, or we're rehashing, this other forms of knowledge that were coming in, our expectations. But at the end of this whole point of interaction, there's something new is actually coming out of it for all. It seems that are involved. And so this question is for kind of wrapping up, as you do with kind of our podcasts and events, thinking about the future of the program. And I'd love to hear from everyone here. What are your thoughts of the future of this program? What would you love to see happen, or things that you're planning for, hoping for? Yeah, I'd love just to get a sense of what's next.
Pratim, you start.
Yeah.
I think, the fact that, like Neema mentioned in the beginning, it's getting more and more difficult for students to come during spring, because spring to us is a much more tougher course. It's 15 weeks and nobody wants to leave the US at that time. So there's somewhere the preference is now working towards summer. But we need to adapt to the current changes. I think one thing to realize is a program like the NFLP is not meant for everybody. But we have to be able to try and broad base it to the maximum number of people, and really, mainstream excellence, let me put it that way, and then try and get the real people who will stick on to that boat, because what they go through is a very intensive thing. And it's highly committed people from Cornell, highly committed people from Keystone, who look at this 6 weeks or 15 weeks as just a small part, which they keep playing for a long time. And that has a very major change. So what I would like to see in the future is we continue this in much more depth and much more analysis. And like Andrew says, how do you democratize knowledge? And how do you democratize innovation? How do you mainstream excellence? And how do you make sure that there are different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of nuances of insights? How do you capture all that together instead of homogenizing in the way that you are trained to look at excellence or innovation or traditional knowledge? And I think we are touching on those kind of cusps of new knowledge and new thresholds with this interaction. And the last decade has shown us some pathways. I would like to go into much more depth and really cast the net wide, but be sure that we would get not many people. But I'm ready to make an attempt to make it as broad-based as possible.
Anandi, we talk about, in last spring, for the first time, we went out back to India and visited and all that. Andrew went, I went. We've started these conversations, all of us together, on NFLC 2.0. What is that new, it's a decade is a long time, right? We've been working together very intensely, experimenting with different things. Our students use the language of transformative when they talk to us about the program. Like I said, the ethnographic method has entered our assessment quite deeply. And so we've got, reams of materials, but the 2.0 that Pratim is sort of, talking about imagines different, expanding the groups of people. So we're not just sticking with the Cornell Adivasi or community student pair, but really bringing in more sort of elite folks in the Nilgiris elite Indian students who are curious about the program. We get a lot of inquiries from other in the Indian institutions wanting to bring some of these methods into what they're doing. All of it sort of addresses this mainstreaming question that Pratim is talking about. But, but for those of us who've been in the kind of working this, right, on the ground, I don't think people quite grasp the amount of effort something like this takes. The de-learning and the de-schooling is enormously intensive, time and effort intensive. And people don't always grasp it. They think it's yet another method that you learn and move on. Here's my skill set, right? And so I'm like, it's not a skill set. It's something much deeper than that. And so, our idea is to, some of the things that we've talked about is smaller modules, which will bring together visitors to the Nilgiris, right? Even so they get a sense of the complexity of the place and get away from their tourist kind of perspective. Longer modules, like the ones we've been running all these years, but with different groups of people. Creating the southern connections much more strongly. That's something that's come up as well. So I think there are many, many opportunities, but we know how intensive the intensity the work requires, and the need for funding models that will actually allow us to do this work. It's, we haven't talked about that at all, but for all of us, that's been so central. I mean, the financial and resource models that we've had to invent, right? Because our community students, we need to pay them stipends, we need to pay their families lost wages. There's a lot that goes into a program like this. And so, yeah, so we're optimistic about what comes next. Pratim's smiling. He's the chap who holds all the optimism for the rest of us and keeps us going. But and we enjoy so much learning. I think all of us, like Andrew said, right? It's a lifelong learning opportunity, right?
Yeah. The funding piece is really critical, but it's also one that we keep at arm's distance at times. And what I mean by that is we could easily scale up a big health intervention, but and get a big grant, but that's sort of moving against the philosophy of sort of an organically slow-moving process that's more participatory, that's more consultative with local communities, that is more grounded in the culture and values and environmental knowledge that's specific to community. So we're not interested in cookie cutter big assessments where you would bring in a big NIH grant or NIMH or Wellcome Trust. We've always sort of pushed back on that. And when we talk about this being a decade process, it's because we've run the program maybe 8 years, but it was 2 years of careful thinking and planning, working with Pratim, Anita, and others at Keystone and with other Cornell colleagues, not just on the funding pieces to make it work, but really sort of mapping out what our goals were and what our pedagogical and research foci would be. And that was a lot of thought went into that. And so that these sort of moments of thinking about 2.0 and what's next, we're in no rush, I feel, to like implement a new model and just run with it. We're very consultative and democratic within the NFLP. NFLC became NFLP this past year, I guess. It was just a Cornell decision to rename, not Neema and myself. I think it was a from on high. But if there was confusion among listeners why we're talking about NFLC, well, that was the name we had up until very recently. And then it just was changed. But yeah, this sort of slowness and letting things marinate on the one hand, and on the other hand, knowing that there are real significant challenges that do need to be addressed at the grassroots level. So there is a kind of tension between wanting to do things that are necessary when we address community distress in particular. There was this sense of we need to do something. There is a lot of community distress, but how to go about it? It's not going to make sense to bring in an army of psychiatrists and medicalize and give people tablets. That's really not going to enhance community well-being, given these domino effect of social, ecological, livelihood, toxicity, climate change. All of these things are so interrelated. So just passing out pills is no solution. So I think moving forward, I want to continue the collaborative, democratic, and kind of slow-moving part of this, rather than try to make NFLP some very large endeavor, which brings in 50 students a year and has people traipsing around and overstaying our welcome. I want to mention one other thing really quick, and that is there's a lot of kind of grassroots activism in South India and Tamil Nadu right now. And a lot of it is actually inspired by things like cinema, by media. There are a lot of films that are now, and always have been, but now there have been some very popular films sort of speaking to the distress and rights issues of Indigenous communities. And so this is galvanizing a sense of momentum at the community level, but also, among good district collectors who are working progressively with communities in some instances, and with some more progressive panchayats as well, who are actually doing good work for the Dalit and Adivasi side. And of course, there are obstacles and recalcitrant forces out there as well, but there has been a kind of media swell of progressive cinema, I would argue, that's been very invigorating. The film Jai Bhim, for example, which was quite a popular film.
Yeah.
Everyone has seen it in the Nilgiris. Everyone has seen it in the Chennai Indigenous communities where the film was based. So.
We keep hearing the language of the speed of trust, move at the speed of
Anita, would you like to
Add
share something from your recent work with the NFLC alumni?
No, I think, one of the things, so, looking to the future, I think this whole program has created a deep interest in the Indigenous youth of this area. There's a sort of thing that people are looking forward to, from a time when we used to get 5 applications, closely to at least 35, 40 applications for those 2 or 3 seats that we have available. So this interest for a sort of perceptive learning, a deeper learning, that's quite high from the community. So for me, for the future, I would really like to see how we could continue to provide that kind of sort of curriculum-based or a leadership courses, things that we could offer to communities. And, just even looking at, for instance, what the NFLC alumni mean for us at Keystone. So when we have like smaller research projects, recently there was one to write about the COVID experiences, a diary keeping project. And it's the NFLC alumni like Jayanti who are leading those projects. There's a smaller grant that we have to look at education initiatives in the Nilgiris. And again, the NFLC alumni have come together and are doing this little baseline research to just find out what's the status of primary and middle education in the Nilgiris. And there isn't a document like that available. So it's a very powerful idea for us right now that these kind of documents are going to come out from within the community. It's going to be people who have been trained and who will be taking this up to, one day, I'm very hopeful that they will write about the health of their communities. They will write about the education of their community. So this kind of an initiative, I think it should go to more places and more communities across India, perhaps. So, yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time, kind of looking forward and what's next. And it seems like an exciting moment. And as Neema mentioned, a decade is a long time. And it's kind of maybe there's some change coming or transformation coming for the program. But I just wanted to thank everyone so much for coming and speaking to us about this. And we've had a couple of people leave. There's some folks left. And so we just want to end if Purnima is still with us here to kind of wrap things up. And then if anyone left would like to ask any questions, you can open the floor for that. Purnima. Hello. So yeah, we just love to end with a few words from AIIS Director General Purnima Mehta. Oh, you're muted, Purnima.
Okay, thank you, Anandi. Well, my heartfelt thanks to Neema Kudva, to Andrew Wilford, Pratim Roy and Anita Varghese, not only for this most insightful and fascinating discussion, but also for showcasing the AIIS funded research project. The AIIS Research Fellowship Program continues to be our core program. And my sincere thanks to Anandi, AIIS, Richa for bringing this webinar to fruition. Last but not the least, my sincere thanks to Sumati Ramaswamy, our president, for leading the year-long 60th anniversary events. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Purnima. So if anyone has any questions or if there's just some points for discussion. Oh, I think I see Sumati.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm glad we do have time for a couple questions, I hope. But first I wanted to say what an impressive program. I had heard a little bit about it through, small conversations that Neema and I had, at various points. So it was just wonderful to get the range of all you're doing, both, in terms of just rigorous, substantial learning, the attention to language, and picking up language skills, but also the ethical components of what you're doing is just wonderful. But, for me, and also the questions about finance, which both Andrew and I think Pratim, but Andrew especially brought up, very interesting. But, one of my big takeaways from all this was thinking about friendship in the context of collaborative work, right? We often use words like network, which, sometimes bothers me because I feel like there's a kind of instrumentality to the concept of network, though I know that's not the only thing. But the word friendship came up a couple of times, and though I did not hear solidarity that much, that is, of course, also a word, right, that's there in the background. And of course, you can't turn friendship into a method at all. But I wondered, and of course, these young students, it's just magical to think about, coming from such different backgrounds, forging these bonds, right? And, the example that Neema gave of that young student who's working in New York now and, the work he did in helping people during COVID and so on. But nevertheless, having said all this, do you sense that there is still structurally, there is inequality, right, in the entire setup, in the sense students from Cornell can come to, Kotagiri and the Nilgiris and, engage in, wonderful, exchange, which everybody benefits from. But have you heard from the young people in Kotagiri that they do not get the chance possibly to do the same? And if so, how do you speak to that point? I mean, this is a huge issue, right, in the world of NGOs, globally operating, however well-meaning we are, from the North, we are still in the North, right? I wondered if that's an uncomfortable question, but something to grapple with. If you have thoughts on that.
You're absolutely right, Sumati. I think the ideal situation, and we should reach that situation very soon, where we feel that Adivasi students from Nilgiris should be able to also go to Cornell and spend time there. They have done it. Cornell has done it with some Tanzanian program where doctors have come and they've spent time in Cornell and they've learned some things. So we should be able to do that also, that they should be able to bridge this divide. But I agree, there are two very, very distinct and very different worlds. And consciously each other, they take that dive into a common pool, which I see after 10 years, they both leverage a lot of strengths. They both leverage a lot of knowledge in their own ways. Some of it for Adivasi communities, it takes time for us to see how is that coming out. Whereas in Cornell students, you immediately see that output or outcome, and you can see that they are benefited. So most often we are asked this question, Cornell students will be benefited for sure, but what is this for the Adivasi students?
Yes.
I think definitely Adivasi students go through a tremendous change and a very, very intricate, intensive, empowering process themselves. Because we, after they finish, we handle the students, we interact with them. Some of them get absorbed into Keystone, things like that. But I feel the exchange that they would have, that they can go back to the US or to do something there, that would be the real true exchange. And we should be able to work towards that. Yeah. We haven't reached there as yet.
Thank you.
We seem to, I don't see Neema anymore. Did she, did she
Oh,
get kicked off the internet? Which makes me worried that I'm going to lose Wi-Fi.
yeah, mine is so unstable too for some reason.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have
You think-
spectrum here and it's lousy, but I mean, Pratim has raised this important, very important issue, and we've been banging that drum to get more happening here. We've had our Keystone colleagues come to Cornell, and we've had, real exchanges at Cornell. Pratim spent a year as a Humphrey Fellow. Anita has come, and other colleagues have come, but we haven't been able to bring the students, and that comes back to the funding. It's
Yep.
just, what revenue streams can be created that would make that possible, and how do we imagine that happening? And there are other issues with funding and inequity on our side as well. The summer program, which seems more popular with students in terms of their timing, is also selecting for students who have the resources to pay for an extra course in the summer. Whereas the spring
I see.
program is, they're using their Cornell tuition to go to Kotagiri. It doesn't cost them anything extra. In fact, their tuition also pays for the subsidizing of the Keystone students. Their meals, their dormitory and everything, and plus the stipend for lost wages. The summer program, is going to select for students that have means, and we have to sort of find resources so that students who don't have those means can participate. So a lot of funding challenges,
Right.
have to sort of grapple. But I really like this idea of friendship as method, and Sumati, you said that's not really possible, but I'd like to think through that a bit more, because I think friendship has been our method in a way. I mean, I have these are my close friends that I'm seeing. And so, whenever we go back to Keystone, there really is not only the building of the knowledge that occurred from the previous years, because we are accumulating over time a knowledge base that, is really substantial. After 10 years, each cohort gets a little taste of it, but it's really looking back at 10 years of knowledge collecting, not just by the students, but by us as individual researchers. Neema, myself, and the others are constantly doing research of our own. So there is this constant growing of knowledge, but also the the growing familiarity and friendship over the years establishes trust and rapport. So we feel, safe to send our students there, but also safe to share ideas openly and frankly. There's no inhibition about telling us to our face if something's not going well and we need to make adjustments on our end, and vice versa if we are concerned about something happening on their end. But I think that friendship and trust is there.
Thank you.
I know we've run out of time, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, when we talk about these exchanges also, we're also very conscious that when the Cornell students come here, they're not just coming into an institution, they're coming into the homes and lives of these Adivasi students. So, in recreating this or facilitating an exchange, would it really make sense for the Adivasi kids to just go and sit in the institution of Cornell? Or what kind of an exchange are we talking about? What kind of those lived experiences or living experiences do we want to share? So I think, we also need to think about, often when the Indigenous students talk about wanting to go to Cornell, I don't think they never tell me that they want to go and see Cornell. They want to see what a Wyatt lives like. They want to see how Rabin lives, what are his parents like, who's his sister. These are the things that local students want to know. So that's just something we need to think about when we talk about exchanges. Yeah.
Wonderful insight. Yeah, thank you for that as well.
All right. Are there any other questions just now? If not, I know we've kept everyone a little bit over, but I think this is such a fabulous conversation. And it's really wonderful to see everyone and talk about this as well as a group. Yeah, just thank you so much, everyone. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.